Hi, my name is Rick Davies, and in this presentation I'm going to be talking about alternative approaches to exploring and testing complex causal models of development interventions. This is a simplified version of a longer presentation made to different evaluation staff late last year. You might also be interested in this recent ODI Methods Lab paper, which looks at how some of the ideas mentioned here can be applied in a specific project context. The approaches I will be introducing here have three features in common. One is that they can use the same kind of data. The second is that they can all be used to explore the same types of causes. And the third is that although they involve different methods, the results which they produce are all comparable. In this slide, we can see an example of the kinds of data the different approaches can use. The rows contain data describing individual cases, which could be projects, countries, organizations, communities, or households. The columns contain attributes of these cases, which may be associated with an outcome of interest which is described in the right-hand column. The cells contain binary information, telling us whether a given column attribute is present in a given row case. The next two slides describe the kind of causes that the six approaches can help us explore. Conjunctural causes are packages of causal conditions that work together to have an effect. For example, I came to the UKS conference because I had the time, I could afford to do so, and I was interested in the conference theme. But other causal packages may be working at the same time. Some people came to the UKS conference because they were requested to speak at the conference. And when people don't come to the conference, it may not be just because of the absence of either of these causal packages. Rather, there may have been other additional factors at work, such as a family crisis. In this next slide, we can see some further distinctions between kinds of causal conditions that can be explored. Being able to pay the conference fee was a necessary but insufficient cause for me to be here. Being invited to speak at the conference may have been a sufficient but unnecessary condition for others to attend. In some conferences, being invited may be both necessary and sufficient. Being interested in the conference theme is unlikely to be sufficient or necessary for people to attend, but it may be part of a package that is sufficient, like mine. All these possible types of causes can be identified using a model assessment tool that can be applied to the findings generated by all six approaches. Before I introduce the six approaches, I want to put them in some context. In each case, some prior work will need to be done to identify and prepare the data that will be used. Although important, I won't be discussing this stage here today. The main focus will be on cross-case analysis, where the aim is to find one or more packages of conditions, known as configurations, that are consistently associated with an outcome of interest. However, I also hope to give some time to how we can then proceed to within-case investigations to find causal mechanisms that are likely to be at work behind these associations. The six approaches I am interested in are listed here. The first is what I would call manual theory-led hypothesis testing. For example, identification of a configuration of conditions suggested by a theory of change as being necessary or sufficient for an outcome to occur. The next four methods are all types of algorithms, an algorithm being a sequence of steps that can be taken to produce a specified result, often involving reiteration and often automated. The sixth approach also involves a prescribed set of steps, but it requires human participation. The first approach should need little introduction. With manual, theory-led hypothesis testing, we try and make the best possible use of prior research and theory to identify the most likely associations between conditions that may be present and outcomes that we are interested in. For example, research on the main factors influencing numbers participating in conferences may have highlighted the importance of the location and the quality of food. This approach is useful where there is already a body of prior knowledge. But there are risks. Outside that body of knowledge, there may be many other possible configurations of conditions that may be important, but will now be ignored. Exhaustive search, also known as brute force search, is a very general problem-solving technique that consists of systematically listing all possible configurations and then checking to see how well each of them perform as predictors of the outcome. This approach produces definitive results, but is only practical with small datasets and binary data. With every additional condition added to a dataset, the processing time doubles. The Quine-McCluskey algorithm is a central part of the QCA approach. QCA stands for Qualitative Comparative Analysis. This algorithm makes a series of comparisons of the configurations of two cases at a time. If there is only one condition difference and the outcome is the same, then that condition is seen as redundant and removed from the configuration. Pair comparisons are continued until no more redundant conditions can be identified. By this time, the total number of configurations describing the cases is usually much smaller and much simpler in structure. This algorithm requires a reasonably well-developed theory of change and a data set that has sufficient diversity. I can explain why later on during the discussion. Decision tree algorithms start by searching for a single condition to filter cases into two piles which are the most homogeneous possible. By homogeneous, I mean the proportion of cases with outcomes present in one pile and outcomes absent in the other. The algorithm then searches for a second condition to filter one of these piles into two more homogeneous piles. This process is repeated until the piles cannot be made any more homogeneous. Decision tree algorithms can cope with missing data and limited diversity in a dataset. They can also produce easy-to-read visual displays, as we will see in the next slide. In this decision tree, we can see 5 branches, each of which describes a particular configuration of conditions. The tree represents the findings of an analysis of data on a subset of projects funded by the Civil Society Challenge Fund. The leftmost branch tells us that the absence of capacity building at the local government level was sufficient for projects to be ineffective in achieving their objectives in 7 of 8 cases. The fourth from left branch tells us that the presence of capacity building at the local government level and of end beneficiaries, but without capacity building of private sector organisations, was sufficient for projects to be effective in achieving their objectives in 13 of 14 cases. Genetic algorithms, which are also known as evolutionary algorithms, work on a very different basis. They start with a population of configurations which are tested for their ability to predict the outcome of interest. The most successful of these are then retained and mated to produce a new population. That population is then subject to the same process. This process of variation, selection, and reproduction is repeated until there is no improvement between one generation and the next in the ability of the best configuration to predict the outcome. This can all be done in Excel using a free add-in called Solver. It's a useful approach when a dataset is too large to use an exhaustive search. It's also a useful way of finding unexpected solutions because it is less likely to get stuck in easy-to-find suboptimal solutions known as local optima. The last of the 6 approaches can be described as an ethnographic or participatory approach, depending on the purpose of inquiry. The ethnographic version was first developed by Gladwin. A participatory version was developed as part of my PhD fieldwork in Bangladesh. Both present the results in the form of a decision tree structure like the one you have just seen, and in both cases the performance of these models is measurable and comparable with the other 5 approaches. These methods are most useful when you want to understand and explore the theories of specific stakeholders. They don't require a pre-existing dataset, but in the process of use they will help generate such a dataset. In this slide you can see the result of a hierarchical card sort shown in the form of a nested classification. Each branch of the tree structure describes a specific configuration of project attributes. On the right are the projects fitting each description. Participants then make binary predictions about which type of projects they think have been the most and least successful, starting from the left and working down all branches to the right. This process generates an overall success ranking, which can then be compared to independent data on the performance of these projects. The results generated by all 6 approaches can be evaluated and compared using the same device, a truth table, which is also known as a confusion matrix, as shown here. Cases in a dataset are sorted into 4 categories. True positives, being cases where the model attributes are present and the outcome is also present. False positives, being cases where the model attributes are present but the outcome is not. False negatives, being cases where the model attributes are absent but the outcome is present. And true negatives, being cases where the model attributes are absent and so is the outcome. The best model will be one where few cases are classed as false positives or false negatives. The important point here is that multiple model performance measures can be generated using this simple tabulation, as will be shown in the next slide. In this slide, I've listed 4 model performance measures I use. For many others, see the Wikipedia entry for confusion matrix. You will note that 2 of the measures correspond to those used by QCA. One is consistency, the proportion of cases that a model applies to and which have the expected outcome. And the other is coverage, the proportion of cases with the outcome that the model applies to. It's also possible to measure the extent to which both of these measures have been optimized, and how the model compares to simply betting that a case will have the outcome which is the most common. I now want to draw some interim conclusions. The first is about what kinds of approaches we should use. The short answer is that often we should make use of combinations of approaches rather than a single approach. Ethnographic methods have the potential to inform theory-led approaches and what set of initial project conditions are selected for inclusion in a data set that will be analyzed. Exhaustive search should be used with small data sets to find and test alternative models that lie outside the realm of our current body of knowledge. Genetic algorithms should be used to explore much larger data sets for the same purpose, but their results in turn can be explored in more depth by using localized exhaustive searches. The second area where I want to make some summary suggestions concerns within-case analysis. This is where we have the opportunity to put some explanatory muscle on the skeleton of associations constructed so far. The structure of a confusion matrix provides us with a framework for case selection and for thinking about appropriate questions to ask about the cases we do select. In the true positives, we need to find some plausible mechanisms at work, ideally in both modal and outlier cases. We can identify these using a measure known as Hamming distance. We then want to identify differences between these cases and those in the other 4 categories. These are some of the ideas I have been considering. In the false positives, where the configuration is the same but the outcome is absent, we may need to look for other obstructing factors that are at work. In the false negatives, where the configuration is absent but the outcome is present, we could look at cases with configurations that are almost the same as the true positives. There we could be looking for other enabling factors that nevertheless have allowed the outcome to occur. In the true negatives, where the configuration and the outcome are both absent, we could look at cases whose configurations have only one condition difference from those in the true positives. These conditions will qualify as necessary conditions and be worth investigating in detail to see how they have their effects. I should add here that I borrowed this last idea from Barbara Bafani. There are 2 other ideas that might be worth mentioning. The first relates to how clients relate to the results of an analysis. When clients find the results boring, as in, we knew that already, within-case analysis should focus on the false positives to highlight the circumstances where common knowledge does not work. Where clients find results unexpected and interesting, within case analysis should focus on the true positives in order to understand how those unexpected processes work in practice. The second idea relates to models of what does not work. In my experience so far, people are mainly interested in models of what does work. But if you do develop models of what does not work, it's likely that you'll come across false positives. That is, cases where the outcome is present. For example, a well-nourished child in a community where malnutrition is the norm. These have been described as positive deviants and are worth investigating in depth. Until recently, most of the work done on identifying positive deviants has been via participatory and community level inquiries, but there is also a place for data-based inquiries as well. In this presentation, I have introduced a number of ways of exploring and testing complex causal configurations. A number of these approaches require their own dedicated software, some of which is not very user-friendly. EvaluC3 is a free Excel app designed to make a set of model development and evaluation tools accessible in one place. You can find out more about it at this supporting website. There is also a poster about it in the catering area adjoining the main meeting room. EvaluC3 is currently available in a beta version. There are still bugs to be sorted out, and there are some extra functions yet to be added. This is a screenshot of the design and evaluate stage of the analysis process. If you're interested to try it out with some support, do get in touch.